Welcome to the lecture on Plato's Theaetetus, sections 161e to 171e. I'm Andrew Chapman, and the goal of this lecture is to show you how, through an examination of the positions of truth relativism and truth subjectivism, Plato shows us that both positions are untenable. In fact, they're worse than untenable. They're self-undermining, according to Plato's arguments. Now, a lot of people, when they first see the positions of truth relativism and truth subjectivism, think that these are plausible positions. They're positions that seem to be non-judgmental, that seem to embrace tolerance and differences of opinion. However, the problem with these positions, Plato shows us, is that they get the nature of truth wrong from the outset, and then they try to build a position of truth based on this mistaken understanding of what truth is, and in so doing end up undermining themselves. Man is the measure of all things. This doctrine is attributed to the pre-Socratic philosopher Protagoras. According to Plato, Protagoras was the founder of the school of Sophism. The Sophists were professional rhetoricians who would travel from town to town, from municipality to municipality, and get paid to teach students how to argue effectively. Now, in Plato's mind, this was an abuse of rhetoric, of argumentation, of logic. Argumentation, rhetoric, and logic, Plato thought, should only be used in the service of the truth, in the service of the good or the beautiful, but the Sophists were engaged in a project of teaching people how to argue for anything at all, how to be successful rhetoricians with respect to any topic, no matter what the topic was. And you can see that in the modern use of the term sophist or sophistry, we retain some of the connotation, the negative connotation of those terms. According to Plato, Protagoras laid out this doctrine, that man is the measure of all things, of the things that are, that they are, of the things that are not, that they are not. Now this is reported by Plato in the dialogue that you read in the Theaetetus, and just one note on what Plato is up to in many of his dialogues. As you already saw, Plato's main mouthpiece in these dialogues is Socrates. Now, Socrates was a historical figure. He was the teacher of Plato. Plato, as you no doubt already know, was also the teacher of Aristotle. Now, it's unclear when we read Plato's Socratic dialogues, these are the dialogues written by Plato where Socrates is the main character, whether what's coming out of the mouth of Plato's Socrates is Plato's own set of views, or whether they're views that Socrates actually held historically, or whether there's some hybrid of the two sets of views. And historical scholars argue about how to interpret Plato's Socrates. In fact, there's one other popular reporting of Socrates as a man and as a philosopher that we have from the history of philosophy, and that picture, the non-Platonic picture, looks very different from the picture that Plato gives us. So while it's no doubt certain that Plato knew Socrates very well, being a student and all, it's just unclear what we should make of Plato's Socrates, and the best thing to do is to take Plato's Socrates not as a historical figure, but as advancing doctrines that we should evaluate on their own merits. Now, similarly here, Plato puts these words into the mouth of Protagoras, and he interprets these words in a very particular way. Plato takes these words that man is the measure of all things to be an expression either of truth relativism or of truth subjectivism. Now, some scholars have claimed that Protagoras wasn't putting forward the doctrines of either truth relativism or truth subjectivism, that instead Protagoras was merely saying that it's up to us as individual rational human beings to make decisions about what seems most justified to us, what we should believe, what we have most reason to act on. Now, that's a very uninteresting claim if that's what Protagoras was saying. Of course, it's up to us. Who else could it be up to figure out what we should believe? So even if Protagoras, the historical philosopher, didn't actually put forward this man is the measure doctrine as an expression of truth relativism or truth subjectivism, we can treat Plato's Protagoras in a way that we treat Plato's Socrates, as putting forward particular positions that we need to evaluate on their own merits, not on the merits of whether they were actually uttered by people who actually historically existed. Now, if you've ever heard someone say something like, well, that's true for me, or maybe they'd say, well, that might be true for you, but it's not for me, that's a popular contemporary expression either of truth relativism or of truth subjectivism. Now, that's if the person who uses those words is speaking carefully. If the person isn't intending to talk about truth, if what they're intending to talk about is justification or belief or how things appear, then they're being sloppy with language, shouldn't use the word true there. But if they actually do intend to talk about truth, what is actually true, then saying that's true for me is an expression either of truth relativism or of truth subjectivism. So what are these positions, truth relativism and truth subjectivism? Well, it's important to note that relativism and subjectivism are used in a number of different domains in philosophy, and so it's important to recognize that when we're talking about subjectivism with respect to truth, that's different than other sorts of subjectivism, or relativism with respect to truth is different from other sorts of relativism. It's easy to understand truth relativism and truth subjectivism by comparing them to their contrary positions. The standard picture of truth, the picture of truth that most philosophers believe is the position that we should be appealing to, the position that comes down to us historically from Aristotle, is a picture of truth where truth is both absolute and objective. So let's look at each of those. Truth absolutism first. Truth absolutism is the picture that for any proposition, if the proposition is true, then it is absolutely true, and if it is false, then it's absolutely false. Now, don't confuse the term absolutism here with something like fundamentalism. If truth absolutism is true, that doesn't mean that we should treat people very badly if they end up believing a false thing. So absolutism here isn't extremism or fundamentalism. So what does it mean for something to be absolutely true or absolutely false? Well, if a proposition is absolutely true or false, then it possesses its truth value, either true or false, based only on its relation to the world and not in terms of any other factors. So the standard picture of truth, the correspondence picture, says that propositions are true if and only if they correspond to the world in a particular way. So notice here that all you have is proposition and world in relation to each other, and no other factors come in to determine the truth value of the proposition. Now, another thing that you shouldn't confuse absolutism with, don't confuse that term absolutism, or its cognate absolutely, with an expression of confidence. For example, it's absolutely true that he's going to win the big game. That's just you, if you say that, expressing that you are very certain that he's going to win the big game, but that is not the same term as absolute in terms of truth absolutism. Next, let's talk about truth objectivism. Truth objectivism is the view that for any proposition, if that proposition is true, then it's objectively true, and if it's false, then it is objectively false. Now, don't confuse the term objectivism here with Ayn Rand's philosophy. That is a very different thing, something that we're not talking about in this lecture. She just so happens to use the term objectivism, even though that was already a term of art in philosophical circles before she came on the scene, but her position has nothing to do with truth objectivism. And if a proposition is objectively true or false, then its possession of its truth value is an objective fact. That is, its possession of its truth value isn't a mere opinion or something like that. So think about the fact that trees photosynthesize. Well, it's an objective fact that trees photosynthesize. It's not somebody's mere opinion. So similarly, if truth objectivism is true, then it's an objective fact when something has its truth value. Now, as I've said, the standard picture of truth is that truth is both absolute and objective. So absolute and objective can complement each other. Those aren't contrasting properties of truth. Let's compare absolutism and objectivism to their contrary positions. First, absolutism's contrary position, relativism. According to truth relativism, for any proposition, if that proposition is true, then it is relatively true. And if it's false, then it's relatively false. Now, what does that mean? Well, if a proposition is relatively true or false, then it possesses its truth value based not only on its relation to the world, as in absolutism, but further in terms of its relation to some relativizing factor. So there's something else involved in determining the truth value of a proposition in truth relativism, in addition to merely the proposition and its relation to the world. And don't confuse the term relatively here with an expression of partial commitment. So, as you shouldn't confuse the term absolutism or absolutely with an expression of commitment, you also shouldn't confuse relativism with an expression of partial commitment. For example, something like, I'm relatively sure that I locked the door. Using relative that way is just unrelated to truth relativism as we're talking about it here. Even further with truth relativism, well, according to absolutism, as we've noted, truth is a matter of a two-place correspondence relation between proposition and the world. So propositions are true if and only if, according to absolutism, they stand in a particular relation to the world. But according to relativism, truth is a matter of a three-place relation between correspondence and action on the part of some person or some group of people. So, for example, if truth relativism is true, then the cat is on the mat isn't true merely in virtue of whether the cat is actually on the mat. That would be absolutism. But according to relativism, it's true also in this example in virtue of whether I, for example, believe that the cat is on the mat or whether I act as though the cat is on the mat. So relativism brings in this extra relativizing factor, individuals or groups of people who act certain ways or believe certain things. And you saw that in Plato's interpretation of Protagoras' relativism, he cashes out truth relativism in terms of individuals' beliefs. So that is, according to Plato's interpretation of truth relativism, if an individual believes that a proposition is true, then that proposition is true. So thus, according to Plato's interpretation of truth relativism, for the truth relativism, there's no such thing as false beliefs. If you believe something, it's true. Now notice the difference here between truth relativism and a different position that we're not talking about in this lecture, truth nihilism. Truth nihilism is the position that there is no such thing as truth. Nothing's true, nothing's false, truth isn't a real property, doesn't exist. Truth relativism is not the position that truth doesn't exist. Truth does exist according to the truth relativist. It's merely that truth is relativized to something, usually individuals or groups of people. Sometimes people in non-philosophical circles misuse the term relativism as if relativism meant nihilism, but relativism and nihilism are not the same position. Relativism isn't denying that something exists, it's saying that it exists in a more complicated way than is usually supposed. Now let's move on to truth subjectivism. Just as truth relativism is the contrary position to truth absolutism, truth subjectivism is the contrary position to truth objectivism. According to truth subjectivism, for any proposition, if that proposition is true, then it's subjectively true, not objectively true. And if it's false, then it's subjectively false, not objectively false. And what does that mean? Well, if a proposition is subjectively true or false, then its possession of its truth value, its being either true or false, is a mere subjective fact. That is, its possession of its truth value is a mere opinion or belief or seeming. It's not an objective fact, it's a subjective fact. So we have two different distinctions here, and when you combine those two different distinctions, you can get four different positions on truth. So subjectivism and objectivism over on the left-hand side of this table are contrary positions, and relativism and absolutism up on the top of the table are contrary positions. So you can end up with four positions: subjectivist relativism, subjectivist absolutism, objectivist relativism, and objectivist absolutism. As we'll see in a moment, subjectivist absolutism is perhaps a very strange position. It's not even clear what that position would mean, but that's a problem with subjectivism with respect to truth more generally. We'll see at the end of this lecture that it's unclear that you can even possibly have subjectivism as a coherent picture of truth. The reason I'm giving you this table is to show you that subjectivism and relativism are not opposed to each other, or objectivism and absolutism aren't opposed to each other, or the other two combinations. We've got two different distinctions going on here. Now let's talk about the sorts of arguments that Plato employs in the Theaetetus to argue against both relativism and subjectivism with respect to truth. These arguments are known as arguments from self-undermining. Some people call them arguments from self-refutation. I think that self-undermining is a better term. As you'll see, according to arguments from self-undermining, certain positions pull the rug out from under themselves. It's not that they destroy themselves, it's that they manage to unjustify themselves. So in an argument from self-undermining, the strategy is to show that if some proposed position is true, then that very position is thereby false. So if a position is true, it undermines the possibility of its own truth. There's something paradoxical about the position. Now, it's not that the position is internally contradictory. It's that the position, if you follow out its logical conclusions, ends up showing that that very position can't be true. Now, it would be impossible for some position to be true if that very position's truth entailed its own falsity. So, if somebody can show via an argument from self-undermining that a position self-undermines, undermines itself, then we can know that that position can't be true. So here's an example. Imagine that I put forward the position that there are no true positions, or I put forward a theory that no theory can possibly be true. Well, If that position or that theory is true, then that very position ends up not being able to be true. The only way to deal with this position or theory, that there are no true positions or theories, is to reject the position. It can't possibly be true since it entails its own falsity. The way I'm interpreting Plato, he gives you two different arguments. One is an argument from self-undermining against relativism. The other is an argument from self-undermining against subjectivism. So we will look at each of these arguments in turn. The argument against relativism is a little more complicated than the argument against subjectivism. So I have put this in premise-conclusion form, where the premises are numbered claims that are supposed to entail or support the conclusion. We'll look at each one of the premises and how it supports the conclusion. First premise: either all beliefs are true or not all beliefs are true. Now, this is just a logical truth. It's either the claim that for any belief it's true, or that there are at least some non-true beliefs. Now notice that after the "or" here, it's not saying that all beliefs are false. It's just saying that there's at least one false belief. So either all beliefs are true, or it's not the case that all beliefs are true. That has to be true just given how logic works. Second premise: there are some people out there that believe that not all beliefs are true. In fact, I'm one of those people. I think that occasionally people have false beliefs. I imagine that you are one of those people. You recognize that occasionally people believe false things. Maybe you believed something false in the past, and then you had to correct your belief. Surely you know other people who disagree with you about things, and you think that those people have some false beliefs. So 2 is just a factual premise. Look out into the world, notice that some people believe false things. This isn't saying that some people only believe false things or that everybody believes false things. It's just that there are some people with false beliefs. Now, if all beliefs are true, and if some people believe that not all beliefs are true, then not all beliefs are true. This might look more complicated to you than it actually is. So imagine this. I believe that not all beliefs are true. I believe that. But if all beliefs are true, then my belief that not all beliefs are true is true. It's a belief of mine. All beliefs are true. Therefore, whatever I believe is true, and I believe that not all beliefs are true. That's all 3 is saying. Now, if all beliefs are true, then not all beliefs are true. This just follows from premises 2 and 3. When we were looking at premise 3 just a second ago, you might have thought it sounded kind of self-contradictory. Well, from premise 2 and premise 3, we can get premise 4. 4 just follows by dint of logic from 2 and 3. So again, 4 says that if all beliefs are true, then not all beliefs are true. However, as you will have noticed, that's a contradiction. Therefore, it can't be the case that all beliefs are true. We started out with something that entailed a contradiction, so we reject that and we go back to 1 and we grab the other side of the "or." If all beliefs are true, we get a contradiction. Therefore, it can't be the case that all beliefs are true. That's what 5 says. But according to truth relativism, and this is Plato's specific interpretation of truth relativism, all beliefs are true. If you believe something, it's true, because truth is relativized to your believing that thing. Therefore, truth relativism has to be false. So let me just give you a synoptic overview of this very quickly. If all beliefs are true, and some people believe that not all beliefs are true, then both all beliefs are true and not all beliefs are true. Therefore, it can't possibly be the case that all beliefs are true. Notice what's happened here. Truth relativism has given truth relativism the ammunition to undermine truth relativism. Now, let's briefly evaluate this argument. Notice that it is open to the truth relativist to respond to that argument in the following way. Look, truth relativism is true, but it's only relatively true. It's not absolutely true. I'm a truth relativist, let's not forget. And it does seem as though the argument that we just looked at, the argument that Plato puts forward, is equivocating on the term true. It seems to use it in a relativistic sense at the beginning and in an absolute sense at the end. So the truth relativist could say, look, I think all truth is relative. So when I say truth relativism is true, I'm not saying it's absolutely true. I'm saying it's merely relativistically true. It's true for me, or something like that. But if that's what the truth relativist is saying, that truth relativism is true but only relatively true, then we might wonder why we should care. If truth relativism is only relatively true, then truth relativism only matters to people who already believe truth relativism, but there are no arguments for truth relativism. There's no way to convince anybody else that truth relativism is true, because arguments, convincing somebody that something is true, those all rely on shared standards of truth, that is, absolute truth. Relativistic truth is truth for each individual person. But if I have my truth and you have your truth, then our truths have nothing to do with each other. So either the relativist needs to admit that truth relativism is self-undermining, as Plato showed in his argument, or needs to say that truth relativism isn't self-undermining, but nobody should care about truth relativism because truth relativism only says things that are relatively true. It doesn't make any actual truth claims about absolute truth. Thus, Plato seems to have shown us that truth relativism, it's either false or we shouldn't care about it. Now let's look at subjectivism. Remember, subjectivism is the view that truth is merely subjectively true. It's not, when things are true, they're merely subjectively true. They're not objectively true, so they're mere opinions or beliefs. Here's Plato's argument against truth subjectivism. First premise: the truth subjectivist believes both that truth subjectivism is true and that the beliefs of those who think that truth subjectivism is false are true. Remember, the truth subjectivist is saying whatever you believe, that's thereby true. So if I'm a truth subjectivist, I need to recognize that whatever you believe is also true. But if you believe that truth subjectivism is false, I'm thereby committed by my own truth subjectivism to believing that your belief is true. So if I'm a truth subjectivism, I need to believe both that truth subjectivism is true and that your belief that truth subjectivism is false is also true. But if somebody believes that the belief that truth subjectivism is false is true, then that person has to also believe that truth subjectivism is false. For example, if I tell you that I believe you, that you believe you have a dog, what I'm committing myself to believing is that you have a dog. So if I believe that you have a dog, then I'm believing that you have a dog. So long as I believe that your belief is true, of course. So, from 1 and 2, we can get the easy conclusion that the truth subjectivist believes that subjectivism is false. Sure, the truth subjectivist also believes that truth subjectivism is true, but who cares? So, either the truth subjectivist is just involved in contradicting herself, in saying that truth subjectivism is both true and false, or the truth subjectivist is just saying, no, it's false. Now, you might at this point be saying, what in the world? Subjectivism is very strange if somebody can claim to hold non-contradictory beliefs that appear to contradict each other. So, one thing you might be wondering is whether subjectivism is even a proper position when we're talking about truth. Subjectivism about truth is really very strange. It's trying to equate mere subjective states with truth. Now, subjectivism certainly makes sense when we're not talking about truth, when we're talking about mere beliefs or mere bodily sensations. So if I say I have a subjective bodily sensation of pain or of cold or of pleasure, then that doesn't mean that you feel it, of course. Subjective states can be of pain or pleasure, things like that. But when I say that truth is subjective, it's just not even clear what I'm talking about. Truth seems to be a necessarily objective thing, such that when I say XYZ is true, what I'm making is an objective claim. Now, if what the subjectivist is merely describing is how things seem, that's fine, but we shouldn't use the word truth. Similarly, if the subjectivist is merely describing what she herself believes, then we also shouldn't use the word truth. We have perfectly good words for seeming or for believing. Seeming and believing. Truth is something else. So there are a couple of lessons embedded in that previous slide from Nietzsche and from Aristotle. The lesson from Nietzsche is this: we should be careful about merely accepting uncritically received wisdom. Of course, that's Nietzsche's main position that he's trying to get us to understand and accept. Don't just believe things because people tell you them. But that doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and dispense with truth altogether and start calling mere subjective states truths. Similarly, you might talk about tolerance here. Yes, it's important for us to tolerate other people's beliefs, but just tolerating somebody else's belief doesn't mean that you need to accept that their belief is true. You can tolerate false beliefs. In fact, you probably should usually tolerate false beliefs unless those beliefs have really terrible consequences. You don't have to say, merely because you're tolerating, that the belief is thereby true. And the lesson from Aristotle is that justification, belief, how things appear, well, these are all really important things, especially when we're doing epistemology. But truth is a different concept from justification, from belief, from how things appear. In fact, we might think that justification and belief aim at truth. When I'm justified in something, I'm justified in believing it's true. Belief is the sort of thing that I should adopt when I think that something is true. So these are separate concepts from each other. We shouldn't collapse them. We need to start our philosophical investigations, Aristotle will tell us, with definitions of important terms and work from there. Otherwise, we start confusing concepts like justification and truth, like belief and truth, like seeming and truth with one another, and we end up getting very strange and unwarranted positions like truth subjectivism. It's very unclear whether truth subjectivism is even a coherent position. Now, relativism is a coherent position, as we saw, but perhaps it undermines itself, and if it doesn't undermine itself, it doesn't seem to be anything more than a mere reporting of belief. Nothing to do with truth going on there. So the moral of the story from Plato is that if we're going to talk about truth, we should talk about objective, absolute truth. And that doesn't mean we need to be intolerant. That doesn't mean we need to stop our investigations. That doesn't mean we should dismiss evidence. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to talk with people who disagree with us. What it does mean is that we shouldn't change the concept of truth just because people sometimes disagree over things or people behave in different ways. So as we've seen, at best, relativism and subjectivism are self-undermining. They can't possibly be true, because if they were, they would be merely relativistically or subjectively true. But at worst, either we shouldn't care about the positions because they have nothing to do with truth at all, or they're not even coherent positions. So I challenge you to see, when you're out in the world, in the non-philosophical goings-on of your daily life, to listen to people and to listen to yourself and to see whether you say things or whether other people say things that mean the same thing as something's true for me but not for you. What do people mean? What do you mean when you say something like that? Because if what you're saying is something that implies relativism or subjectivism, you are embracing a contradictory metaphysics of truth. Maybe instead of saying true, you should say, I believe that, or I like that, or I'm justified in believing that, or it seems that way to me. But don't invoke truth unless you're actually talking about truth. Thank you.